very own meeting of the Federation, or mini meeting. I'd like to welcome first, let's start from around the table, not necessarily from west to east. BC Premier Christy Clark, good to see you here.
Nice to be back.
And I'm in the chair seat this time, but there's Premier Ghiz from PEI. Good to have you in your own province hosting us.
Great. Thank you very much, Evan.
And, of course, Premier Wall from Saskatchewan is here. Good to see you.
Hi, Evan.
And Premier Wynne from Ontario. So, here we are convening. You all spent about 3 days in Charlottetown, and you came up with a number of pretty critical asks. One, a roundtable and a national inquiry on murdered and missing Aboriginal women. You had asks of the federal government in terms of healthcare spending, on aging, on infrastructure, on pensions, on energy, some big issues. The federal government has already come back and essentially said no on everything. No to a national inquiry, no to a roundtable, no to any more money for some of these issues. You haven't even got off the island yet. Premier Wynne, let me start with you. What do you make of the federal response?
Well, first of all, good morning. Great to be here. It's very important that as premiers we come together, as we have, and it's been a great meeting, and that we raise the issues that we know are of provincial and territorial importance, but have impact across the country. And so we've done that. You went through the list. The fact that the federal government has immediately rejected the call for a national inquiry on the missing and murdered Aboriginal women, or a roundtable, or they're not interested in working with us on infrastructure issues. That doesn't mean that those aren't important issues. It doesn't mean that those aren't things that we have to continue to raise and take responsibility for in the ways that we can. But we all know, and over and over during this meeting, the issue of having a partner, having a federal partner to work with us on these issues makes us all stronger. We're going to continue to raise that.
But what does this tell you about that relationship, Premier Clark? What message does it send from the federal government to the provinces, the partners, that you haven't finished the meeting and you've got a series of no's?
Well, on healthcare, Joe Oliver was out today saying that he thought that it was, there may be some things we could do on healthcare. So it hasn't been all negative, I don't think. But, typically there is always a tension between provincial and federal governments. We deliver 80% of the programs for the people of this country: healthcare, education, those programs that people depend on. And the federal government collects 2/3 of everybody's taxes. That's the problem in this country that we need to figure out how to fix. Now, for us in British Columbia, we've balanced our budget. We are growing our economy. It is really important that the federal government be a partner in that, working with First Nations, being a part of helping us build the infrastructure that we need. We can make a huge contribution to Canada, just like Alberta has done with the oil sands, but we can only do it if the federal government decides they want to help us grow the economy together.
Well, you mentioned this, what is called often the fiscal imbalance, right? That the provinces deliver the services, and you have a study that you all commissioned to say that the provinces won't have the money to pay for the services, and the feds, who will have a surplus next year for the election, and you want some of that money. Premier Ghiz, you talked about that this meeting of the premiers was really about sending a message to the Prime Minister about the priorities for 2015. Is this fiscal imbalance the big issue? What do you want from him?
Well, I think it's important as we move in to 2015 that it's not only a message to the Prime Minister, it's a message to all federal political leaders and parties that there is going to be an election. Issues that are important to Canadians are also important to all the provinces. And if they want to look at making a difference, they need to look at what is going to help out the citizens of Canada the most around economy and jobs. And we know that infrastructure spending is needed in all our provinces that have aging infrastructure, but also provinces that need new infrastructure as well because their economies are booming. We know that there is an aging population out there. The Canadian Medical Association has come out and said the exact same thing, that there should be a national strategy. There should be an innovation fund for seniors in this country. We know that the Conference Board of Canada has come out and validated what we said. The Parliamentary Budget Officer said the exact same thing. They have the fiscal capacity.
So put a number on it, though. You want more money for infrastructure? I know Premier Wynne has said that the provinces, they have 3% of GDP, including municipalities on that, maybe up to 5%. Some have talked about that. Put a number on it. It's a big number you want from the feds.
We're going to make a realistic request. That's why we didn't put a number on it yet. We said these are our priorities. We're going to get together as premiers in different working groups, and we're going to take all the evidence-based research there is, and we're going to make a reasonable request based on where surpluses are and what our demands are. So we are going to do that moving into next year.
Well, hang on, let me just bring in, I know Brad Walls, I just want you to jump in. Let's just focus this for a second on infrastructure, because that's one thing that Premier Ghiz is just talking about. It is a big issue. Kathleen Wynne's talked a lot about that as well. The federal government will say, look, we have the Build Canada Fund already. We are supporting it. What else do the provinces want?
They do. It's a good first step. It's just not enough. They also have the P3 Canada Fund, and we're grateful. We have a couple of projects that have been approved in our province as a result of that particular initiative, and so that's positive as well. It's just not enough. The infrastructure deficit in the country, some tied to jurisdictions of growth and some just to the aging infrastructure in the country, is significant. That deficit is significant. So we have to stay on this message. Christy raised what Joe Oliver said earlier today about maybe they're interested in a healthcare innovation fund. My friend Robert's been talking about that for some time. I've been talking about that for some time in healthcare. The feds early on were not interested at all. I think the Prime Minister indicated there wasn't much of an interest. And so there seems to be some movement there. So, the overall theme of the early questions here have been the no's that have come from the federal government. We have to be persistent and consistent as premiers to say, whether it's an innovation fund in healthcare for seniors, for improved care for seniors, or infrastructure, we have to stay on this. This is a process, not an event. We have to continue to make the case, not just to the federal government, but to Canadians, because that's where we'll find support, I think.
But just to go back to your original question, Evan, I think the answer to that question, what's the message to us, the provinces? I don't think it's about the message to us as the leaders. It's the message from the federal government to the people of our provinces and territories, who are the people of Canada. We don't bring these issues to this table because we made them up. We bring the issues to the table because we know they are of concern to people in our provinces and territories, and they're of concern to the economic growth of our jurisdictions. So I think that we have to ask the federal government, wouldn't it be better? Wouldn't it be in the interests of your constituents, who are our constituents, for there to be an ongoing conversation between the provinces, territories, and the federal government? If I said to municipalities in Ontario, we're just going to dismiss out of hand all of the concerns that you bring to the table, that would be irresponsible. So I think it's the same kind of relationship that's needed.
And here's the thing that works for infrastructure is how do you create jobs in Canada? You export your goods around the world. What do you need to do that? You need roads, you need airports, you need railways, and you need ports.
And transit.
And the federal government, by investing in transportation infrastructure in particular, allows us to export, allows us to create jobs, and guess what? They get 2/3 of the tax money from that. To me, that's a pretty good return on investment for the feds.
I'm speaking with Premiers Clark, Premier Wall, Premier Wynne, Premier Ghiz as we convene a small premiers gathering here on Prince Edward Island. I want to zero in on an issue that dominated the first part of the conference, which was the issue of murdered and missing Aboriginal women. All of the premiers were united in their call for a national public inquiry and a round table for it. I'm not sure the difference. Maybe we can talk about that. The Prime Minister has been adamant. No, this would be redundant. He says there have already been 40 studies. He points to last May's RCMP study that shows that the RCMP solves crimes against Indigenous women at the exact same rates as non-Indigenous women. He says, we know the problem. We know the causes. It's now not, as he says, a matter of sociology. It's a matter of crime. He won't budge on that. You offered an olive branch with this round table. Let me start with you, Christy Clark. What do you make of the federal government's response on this, and how to approach this issue now?
I'm a little bit disappointed with the approach, because in British Columbia, we did do an inquiry. It was expensive. And what we discovered was it wasn't just about solving individual crimes. There were systemic problems that we needed to address as a government. There wasn't nothing left to learn. We did learn a lot.
The Opal Commission.
The Opals. And I think we have to go deeper and look at those systemic problems rather than just saying it's a crime like any other crime and police can solve it. There is a lot more that can be done. And First Nations people in this country deserve to know that their governments care about these impoverished women who are missing and murdered in Canada. We're a rich country. And there's a group of women from one particular background who are going missing and being murdered at a far greater rate than others. And I mean, that's just not acceptable.
I talked to National Chief of the AFN, I know you all did, Ghislain Picard, who was here, and he said how the federal government responds to this particular issue reflects in a way how the federal government approaches other issues, critical issues about working with First Nations on issues that you all deal with, natural resource development, pipelines. Premier Wall, what's your take on what he said and the consequence of the federal government's response on this issue?
To say there's no societal link here that we need to continue to investigate, inquire about, and act on, we obviously don't agree. I think that we don't agree as premiers. I don't agree. I do think there's obviously a justice element we need to seek to improve to protect women and girls. Whatever needs to be done, we ought to be canvassing all of the options. I also have said, and this I'm just speaking for me now, I've said that I think that we need to ensure that whatever happens next is infused sort of by greater participation, or great participation, let me say, by First Nations, by Aboriginal people and leaders, local leaders and national leaders, so that there is that responsibility element that comes into it. 43% of the violence against Aboriginal women comes from spouses or someone close in the family or friends. So we have to ensure that we have the involvement, obviously, of First Nations leadership and Aboriginal leadership, I should say, and they're more than happy to do that. The final thing I would just say is this. Maybe, this didn't come across, frankly, but I'm not sure if the federal government was trying to reflect the fact that Canadians also want action. I mean, I hear that at home. There have been a lot of studies. There are several hundreds of recommendations out there from studies back to 1996. And I think Canadians would probably tell us, as long as this inquiry or roundtable or whatever is next is actually about action. And actually, premiers have demonstrated we can get that sort of action-oriented work done as well, on whether it's healthcare. We're going to do it on trade.
Well,
and we could do it a lot better if the federal government was involved in that sort of
Well, and even on this, because there's a third part of what was decided at the meeting with the Aboriginal leaders, which is that we would, as premiers, as provincial leaders, work towards a strategic action plan, a socioeconomic action plan for the next National Aboriginal Women's Summit. So yes, we support the NAO's call for a national inquiry and for a roundtable with ministers, but we also are going to develop an action plan.
But what would the national inquiry or roundtable, Premier Wall? It's hard to distinguish, perhaps, what they might do differently, but what would it accomplish? Again, the Prime Minister says we don't need to spend the money on it because we already know the answers. And so this is more politics from the premiers as opposed to practical solutions. What would your response be?
Well, my response would be that we believe that supporting the national Aboriginal leaders and organizations' call for a national inquiry is an important thing for us to do, and we support that because we believe that there are issues that can be unearthed. As Christy has said, in the inquiry, they discovered that there wasn't nothing more to discover, that there were other issues that hadn't been unearthed. But at the same time, Evan, we're saying, yeah, we do need to take action. We need to have an action plan that all of us have bought into because we do understand that there are underlying sociological
What
issues.
about the number of children in care, as an example? That's something we've
Exactly.
jointly said we're going to work on. 50% of the kids that come into government care in British Columbia, Aboriginal kids. We've got to do something to lower that number. We're going to work together as premiers, because it's our area of responsibility, to try and fix that.
Clean water on reserves, poverty issues.
You bet.
Because premiers took action in healthcare. Robert mentioned it today. There's been $263 million saved in the joint purchasing of pharmaceuticals, or bulk purchasing of pharmaceuticals. That's a lot of money. That's action. There's a long list of other things that are happening in healthcare. So, we could achieve much in terms of action.
Yes.
Much more if the feds are there.
Absolutely.
All right. This summit can't go on all day, although I wish it could. At the end of your conference, some language surprised me. You had talked a lot in the last conference about a Canadian energy strategy. This year, for the first time, Quebec joined, and we'll talk to Premier Couillard in a minute on the program. And there's new language in here, Premier Ghiz. it on climate change and social and environmental responsibility. And it says here, I'll read it, transition to a lower carbon economy through appropriate initiatives such as carbon pricing, carbon capture and storage, and other technological innovations while meeting current and future energy needs. Putting the language for the first time on climate change and on carbon pricing in here seems to me to be a significant new development. What are the premiers telling us about a price on carbon and action on climate change?
Well, what we're saying is that, first of all, it's wonderful to have British Columbia and Quebec involved in the Canadian energy strategy. You know, this is the first time in a number of years that we have all provinces participating in this. This is an extremely important process and economic driver for our country. And we have a vision and principles that we've agreed on. We're going to work on that over the next while. And we know that all provinces are doing different things. And that's why we list it, whether or not it was carbon pricing. I know Brad's got clean coal technology that he's going to be introducing soon. We do wind in Prince Edward Island. There's carbon trading that goes on. There's a whole lot of different things that happen in different provinces. Not every province is going to be into a carbon tax like in British Columbia, or maybe carbon pricing or clean coal. But everybody realizes that energy is extremely important for our country. The oil sands is a major driver. We're lucky to have the oil sands in Canada and the impact that that's having on our economy. We know that there's huge projects in British Columbia, in Saskatchewan. Hydro is huge. New clean technologies in Ontario. Wind in Prince Edward Island.
You say we all know that's important, but when you put carbon pricing in here, in the current climate, I understand the pricing mechanisms in British Columbia or Alberta or Saskatchewan.
But it's happening.
But what message does that send? Does that drive that to the top of the agenda? And I know this is something that Ontario and Quebec are very keen on.
Well, you know, I think what's important about the vision and principles that have been released as a result of this meeting is that they really lay out the reality that there is a lot going on in the country, that carbon pricing, whatever it looks like in whatever jurisdiction, you know, we shut down our coal-fired plants in Ontario. There was a cost associated with that. There's a carbon tax in BC. There's a levy in other jurisdictions. I mean, we have to, as a country, understand how we move forward, how we contribute to a global reduction in carbon emissions.
Do you need a federal partner to organize it on?
No. Well, actually, on this one, we can take action. That's what this strategy is about.
Okay, so this is not a plea for some kind of national carbon pricing mechanism?
In fact, that would be the worst thing that could happen in Canada.
More agreement
because
on the negative.
A one-size-fits-all solution, we know, will not work. Our provinces are so different. But you asked, what is significant about this? We are defining Canada, yes, as a global energy superpower. But now we are defining us as also a clean energy superpower. So we can supply clean energy internally, but we can also do a ton to reduce greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. That's what we're doing in BC. 82 megatons of liquefied natural gas coming from British Columbia is going to do a whole bunch to reduce dirty emissions in places like China.
Yeah, okay, last question here. I think now that I've convened this mini meeting of the First Ministers, I think I've convened as many as the Prime Minister now almost, because he's done one. He doesn't meet collectively with the premiers very often. I think it just once in his entire term, if I'm not mistaken. Now you guys are going to China in what used to be called those Team Canada trips, but it's Team Canada without the coach, it looks like, without the Prime Minister. What message does that send? Is this all about the provinces are looking at the federal government and says, look, we don't have the greatest relationship, whether it's on pricing of carbon or China and trade, we're going it alone.
You know, there's been two meetings with the Prime Minister since he was elected in 2006. I was in 2007, so we've been together for a number of times. It was one that was very good, and it was at the conference center, I believe, in Ottawa, and it was right when the recession hit, and it was around infrastructure. And you want to know what? We got a lot done. The second one was at 24 Sussex on a Friday night over a couple of hours, and I think Danny Williams termed it Weekend at Bernie's. So those were the two meetings that we've had with the Prime Minister.
Danny Williams just for that.
So, you know, we've been on, this will be our third mission together as premiers. But these are still things we can do on our own. You know, if the Prime Minister ever wanted to call us together, I'm sure we'd all show up. And do I think it's the best approach to take? I do. Our current Prime Minister doesn't think so. I will give him credit. If I want a one-on-one meeting, he'll grant me that one-on-one meeting. But, we met for the first hour and a half at this meeting at Province House, Prince Edward Island, where the Fathers Confederation met 150 years ago. And I can tell you that sitting around talking about issues of national importance, I think has to happen if you want to continue to evolve and grow and prosper economically, socially as a country. And I do think it is a missing component that's, from my personal perspective, that's missing right now in Canada.
Absolutely. And wouldn't it be wonderful if the Prime Minister were interested in taking part? Because the door is open, as you've said, Robert, at any point. If the Prime Minister wanted to take part, he is more than welcome.
All right, well, the door is always open here.
You've been a pretty good chair. Robert was
Yeah.
maybe a little better, but you've been pretty good at it.
There's a big shoes to fill, and it's his island. Premiers Clark, Wall,
Thank you.
Wynne, and Ghiz. Great to see you
Thanks,
here. I
Evan.
appreciate your time. We'll be watching these issues unfold in the lead up to the federal election of 2015. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Owen.